Grease under his fingernails never really washed out. Abraham scrubbed the pumice stone until his knuckles cracked, staring into the pink ceramic sink. 10 years since he last carried a rifle, yet the bitter scent of cordite lingered behind his molars. Tonight's final delivery would drag him backward. Gravel crunched beneath the balding tires of Abraham's delivery van, a harsh, rhythmic grinding that broke the suffocating silence of the Palisades. He cut the engine. The heater fan ticked as it died, leaving only the sound of his own shallow breathing. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling the oily grit of a 14-hour shift smeared across his skin. The dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. Lily's babysitter was charging time and a half by now, bleeding his bank account dry while he sat in the driveway of a house that cost more than his entire bloodline would ever earn. He grabbed the padded envelope from the passenger's seat. It felt light, inconsequential, probably legal documents or some high-end luxury watch requiring a discreet, bonded courier. Abraham didn't care. He just wanted the signature. Stepping out into the damp night air, he felt the familiar ache in his right knee, a parting gift from a jagged piece of shrapnel outside Kandahar. He limped up the slate walkway. The architecture was imposing, all sharp angles and expansive glass, a monument to sterile, untouchable wealth. But something was wrong. The security lights were dead. Abraham paused. His boots made no sound on the wet stone. He sniffed the air. The heavy scent of wet pine and expensive mulch was expected. The faint, sour tang of cigarette smoke, specifically the unfiltered, harsh tobacco favored by men who didn't care about their lungs, was not. The massive oak front door hung open an inch. Abraham's thumb hovered over the doorbell. His instinct, honed by years of civilian drudgery, told him to drop the package, forge a signature, and drive away. It wasn't his house. It wasn't his problem. He had a 7-year-old daughter asleep in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap laundry detergent. She needed her father, not a martyr. He turned his back. He took one step toward the van. Then he heard it. Zzzzt. The sharp, plastic ratcheting sound of a heavy-duty zip tie being pulled tight. It wasn't a sound you heard in affluent living rooms. It was a sound that belonged in dusty courtyards, in the back of unmarked vans, in the nightmares Abraham swallowed down every night with a glass of cheap bourbon. He stopped. The muscle memory awoke before his conscious mind could object. His shoulders dropped. His breathing shifted, dropping from his chest down into his diaphragm. The exhaustion of the day vanished, replaced by a cold, hyper-focused clarity that he simultaneously craved and despised. Abraham pushed the oak door open with the flat of his palm, slipping inside the foyer. The house smelled of lavender diffusers and ozone. "Keep her head down," a voice rasped from the living room. The accent was thick, vaguely Eastern European, grinding against the pristine acoustics of the vaulted ceiling. Abraham slid along the wall. The texture of the Venetian plaster felt cool and rough against his jacket. He peered around the edge of a massive, abstract bronze sculpture. 3 men, professionals, but sloppy. They wore dark clothing, but their boots were muddy, tracking debris across a cream-colored Persian rug. One stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding an automatic rifle with the casual negligence of a man who hadn't been shot at enough. The second was rifling through a mahogany desk, The third had his hand twisted into the dark, immaculate hair of a woman kneeling on the floor. Dottie Carlyle. Abraham recognized her from the financial magazines left behind in the courier office. In print, she looked untouchable. Sharp features, tailored suits, eyes that evaluated and dismissed the world in a single glance. Now, her silk blouse was torn at the shoulder, revealing a stark white collarbone. Her lip was split. A thick line of crimson swelled and dripped onto her chin. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were wide, dilated with raw terror, but her jaw was locked tight. She was assessing them, calculating. "The codes, Ms. Carlyle," the man holding her hair said, pulling her head back sharply. "We don't have time to play corporate games." "Go to hell," she breathed, her voice a fragile rasp that cracked on the last syllable. The man raised his free hand, forming a heavy, calloused fist. Abraham didn't think. Thinking got you killed. He stepped out from behind the bronze sculpture. He didn't have his sidearm. He hadn't owned a gun in 6 years. He had nothing but the padded envelope, a heavy maglite flashlight on his belt, and the brutal mechanics of close quarters combat hardwired into his nervous system. He unclipped the maglite. The heavy, knurled aircraft aluminum felt reassuringly dense in his palm. The man by the window turned, catching the movement in his peripheral vision. "Hey." Abraham closed the distance in 3 long strides. He didn't swing the flashlight like a club. He thrust it forward like a piston. The heavy casing caught the man directly in the throat. The cartilage gave way with a sickening, wet crunch. The man didn't scream. He simply folded, dropping his rifle as his hands clawed at a windpipe that no longer functioned, his eyes bulging as he sank into the expensive rug. Chaos erupted, stripping away the sterile quiet of the mansion. The man at the desk whipped around, his hand plunging beneath his jacket. Abraham didn't stop his forward momentum. He let the choking man fall, using the man's dropping shoulder as a pivot point to launch himself toward the desk. He grabbed the heavy bronze desk lamp, an ugly, modern art piece with a marble base, and hurled it. It wasn't a clean, cinematic throw. It was frantic and desperate. The marble base clipped the second man's shoulder, spinning him off balance just as he cleared a suppressed pistol from his holster. The gun coughed, a dull thwip that sent a bullet punching harmlessly into the drywall above Abraham's head, showering them in white gypsum dust. Abraham crashed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the smell of cheap aftershave and unwashed cotton flooding Abraham's senses. The man was heavily muscled and frantic. An elbow caught Abraham in the ribs, a sharp, radiating agony that stole his breath. Abraham gritted his teeth, tasting old pennies. He ignored the pain, wrapping his hand around the back of the man's neck and driving his forehead violently into the bridge of the man's nose. Bones snapped. Hot moisture sprayed across Abraham's cheeks. The man went limp, groaning beneath him. Abraham scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving, lungs burning as if he'd inhaled fiberglass. He turned to the third man, the one holding Dottie. The man had dropped her hair and stepped back, pulling a heavy Glock from his waistband, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't a hardened killer. He was a hired thug who had just watched 2 of his crew get dismantled in less than 10 seconds. "Don't move," the man screamed, the gun wavering between Abraham and Dottie. Dottie was still on her knees. The zip tie dangled from her left wrist, half secured. She looked at Abraham. He was a mess. A scruffy courier in a faded brown jacket, chest heaving, knuckles bleeding, eyes entirely devoid of humanity. He looked more like a feral dog than a savior. "Put it down," Abraham said, his voice flat, devoid of the adrenaline that were currently vibrating through his arms. "I'll kill her," the man yelled, pointing the barrel down at Dottie's head. Dottie didn't cower. In a move born of sheer, terrified adrenaline, she threw her weight forward, slamming her shoulder directly into the man's knees. It was a clumsy, desperate tackle, but it worked. The man buckled, his shot going wild, burying itself into the hardwood floor. Abraham crossed the room in an instant. He kicked the gun from the man's hand, the heavy steel spinning across the floorboards. Before the thug could recover, Abraham drove the toe of his steel-toed boot into the man's ribs, snapping 3 of them with a sound like dry firewood breaking. The man curled into a fetal ball, wheezing. Silence rushed back into the room, deafening and heavy. Abraham stood there, his chest rising and falling in jagged rhythms. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. The phantom smell of cordite was gone, replaced by the very real, metallic stench of copper and sweat. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. "We need to move," Abraham rasped, looking down at Dottie. She remained on the floor, staring at the ruined bodies around her. Her chest hitched. She touched her split lip, her fingertips coming away red. She looked up at him, her corporate armor entirely shattered, leaving only a terrified, disoriented woman in a ruined silk blouse. "Who?" she started, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" "Courier," Abraham said, reaching down and grabbing her untied wrist. His grip was firm, rough with calluses. "You have an open delivery. Now get up." He hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the slick floor. "My shoes." "Leave them." Abraham dragged her toward the kitchen. The layout of these mega mansions was always the same. Kitchens led to service doors led to the grounds. "Wait, the police. We need to call—" Dottie protested, her bare heels slapping against the cold marble tiles. "They had a jammer. I checked my phone before I walked in," Abraham lied. He hadn't checked anything. He just knew men like this didn't operate without cutting the digital umbilical cord first. "There will be a perimeter team outside." They heard the shots. They burst into the cavernous kitchen. Stainless steel appliances gleamed like morgue slabs under the moonlight filtering through the skylights. Abraham moved to the rear service door. Locked. He wrapped his hand in his thick canvas jacket and punched through the reinforced glass pane near the handle. The glass shattered, biting into his forearm through the fabric. He ignored the sting, reached through and twisted the deadbolt. He kicked the door open. The night air rushed in, damp and freezing. "Run," he ordered. Dottie hesitated for a fraction of a second, staring into the pitch-black tree line at the edge of her manicured lawn. Then a shout echoed from the front of the house. "The perimeter team." She ran. Abraham followed, keeping himself between her and the house. The wet grass soaked through his boots instantly. He could hear Dottie gasping, her bare feet tearing against hidden rocks and fallen branches as they hit the edge of the woods. They plunged into the dense thicket of old-growth pines behind the estate. The darkness swallowed them whole. Branches whipped against Abraham's face, leaving stinging welts. He kept his hand firmly on Dottie's elbow, steering her blindly through the underbrush, pushing her deeper into the black. Behind them, flashlights began to sweep the lawn, frantic beams of harsh white light cutting through the fog. Shouts rang out, angry and disjointed. Abraham's knees screamed in protest with every uneven step. His lungs burned. He wasn't 25 anymore. He was a worn-out father who ate microwave dinners and slept 4 hours a night. His body was betraying him, the adrenaline spike beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, aching fatigue in its wake. "I can't," Dottie gasped, stumbling hard against a massive pine trunk. She slid down the rough bark, clutching her side. "My feet, they're cut." Abraham stopped, kneeling beside her. The sounds of pursuit were still distant, but they were organized, sweeping the grid. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He reached out in the dark, his rough hands finding her ankle. He ran his thumb over the sole of her foot. It was slick with moisture. Blood. "They're bleeding," Abraham said, his voice a low, mechanical hum in the darkness. "You leave a trail on the wet leaves. Dogs will smell it in an hour." Dottie pulled her foot away, a sudden flash of indignant anger piercing her terror. "Then carry me, if you're so capable." Abraham let out a dry, humorless exhale. "I have a bad knee and 3 cracked ribs. You walk or you stay here and negotiate your ransom." He stood up, pulling a stained blue bandana from his back pocket. He tore it in half with his teeth, the fabric ripping with a loud screech. He knelt back down and grabbed her feet, binding the fabric tightly around her bleeding arches. It was a crude, filthy bandage, but it would slow the bleeding. "This is insane," she muttered, wincing as he pulled the knot tight. "I pay $2 million a year for private security." "You should ask for a refund," Abraham said. Up. They moved for what felt like hours, though Abraham knew it was barely 45 minutes. The terrain grew steeper, the manicured woods of the affluent giving way to wild, treacherous ravines. Abraham's limp was pronounced now. He dragged his right leg over fallen logs, his breathing a wet, ragged rasp in the quiet night. Dottie was limping too, shivering violently as the temperature plummeted. The torn silk of her blouse offered zero protection against the biting chill of the damp earth. "Down here," Abraham whispered, his voice cracking. He gestured to a depression in the hillside, an old drainage culvert, half choked with dead leaves and rotting branches, leading beneath a forgotten access road. It smelled of decay and wet concrete. Dottie recoiled, her nose wrinkling. Even terrified and freezing, the billionaire reflex remained. "In there. It smells like a sewer." Abraham didn't argue. He grabbed her shoulder and practically shoved her down the muddy embankment. She slid, crying out as her silk pants tore against a sharp root and tumbled into the mouth of the concrete pipe. Abraham slid down after her, dragging a large, dead pine branch over the entrance to break their silhouette. The interior of the culvert was suffocatingly dark. The curved concrete walls bled a deep, pervasive chill that seeped immediately into Abraham's bones. He slumped against the curved wall, his legs giving out entirely. He rested his head against his knees, trying to suppress the loud, wet wheeze in his chest. Dottie crawled toward the back of the pipe, putting as much distance between herself and the opening as possible. For a long time, the only sound was their synchronized, desperate breathing. "Are you dying?" she asked finally, her voice floating in the pitch black. It wasn't asked with deep empathy, but with the pragmatic concern of someone assessing an asset. Abraham let out a low grunt. Not tonight. Just old injuries. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, pulling out a battered tin of mints. He popped one into his mouth, crunching the hard sugar. The sharp peppermint taste temporarily overpowered the taste of blood in his throat. "Want one?" he asked, shaking the tin. "I want my phone," she snapped, though he heard the distinct chatter of her teeth. "I want my security chief on a secure line. I want to know how a heavily armed extraction team bypassed my biometric locks." "Inside job," Abraham stated flatly. He swallowed the mint. "Biometrics require clean power. Someone cut the hard line to the backup generator and fed a loop to the server. You only do that if you know where the junction boxes are." A heavy silence followed. In the dark, Abraham could hear the rustle of her clothing as she shifted. "You're not a courier," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. Route 4, West Side Distribution. I get dental after 90 days. Couriers don't crush men's throats with flashlights. They don't know about biometric bypass loops." "I read a lot," Abraham muttered, closing his eyes. His ribs throbbed with a sickening rhythm. He carefully reached inside his jacket, feeling his side. The skin was hot to the touch, swelling rapidly. Definitely cracked, maybe broken. He heard her shifting closer. The faint scent of her expensive perfume, jasmine and something sharp, like bergamot, cut through the smell of moldy leaves. "Listen to me," Dottie said, her tone shifting. It was the voice she used in the boardrooms, command disguised as negotiation. "I am Dottie Carlyle, CEO of Etheris Biotech. The people looking for me are corporate espionage mercenaries. They want proprietary algorithms. If they get me, they will torture the passcodes out of me and dump my body in the ocean." "I know who you are," Abraham sighed. "Then you know my net worth," she pressed, her hand finding his knee in the dark, gripping it tightly. "Get me to a police station. Keep me alive until sunrise. I will wire $5 million into any offshore account you name. Clean, untraceable. You will never have to deliver another package. You can disappear." $5 million. Abraham tilted his head back against the concrete. In his mind, he saw Lily's inhaler. He saw the stack of final notice utility bills on his kitchen counter. He saw the crumbling brick of his apartment building. $5 million would buy a new life. It would buy the finest asthma specialists. It would buy security. It was the most tempting lie he had ever been offered. "Money," Abraham said softly, a bitter edge bleeding into his tone. "Only matters to people who believe tomorrow is guaranteed." He pushed her hand off his knee. It wasn't a violent gesture, just a firm dismissal. "You think I'm lying?" she challenged, her voice rising slightly. "I honor my contracts." "I think," Abraham replied, opening his eyes and staring into the black void, "that if those men find us, your bank accounts won't stop a 5.56 round from tearing through my chest. Money doesn't buy oxygen when your lungs are filling with blood. It doesn't put the bone back together." He leaned forward, groaning as his ribs protested. He began feeling around the muddy floor of the culvert, his fingers searching for rocks. "What are you doing?" she asked, exasperated. "Building a tripwire. If they come down the bank, I want to hear them before they shine a light in here." Dottie went quiet. The corporate armor had failed. The money had failed. She was stripped down to the raw, terrifying reality of the dirt, the cold, and the bleeding, stubborn man beside her. Abraham found a few fist-sized stones and began stacking them precariously near the entrance. Using a shoelace he unthreaded from his boot to tie a crude tension line to a thick root. It was sloppy, but it would make noise. As he reached up to tie the knot, his jacket shifted. He gasped, a sharp hiss of pain escaping his lips as his torn arm scraped against the concrete. The glass cut was deeper than he thought. Hot blood was soaking through his sleeve, dripping down his wrist. He slumped back down, breathing heavily. Damn it. He felt movement beside him. Dottie struck a match. The sudden flare of yellow light was blinding. Abraham flinched, instinctively raising a hand. Dottie held a small book of customized matches from a high-end restaurant. In the flickering glow, she looked utterly ruined. Her perfect hair was a tangled nest of twigs and mud. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried blood. Yet the sharp, calculating edge in her eyes was entirely focused. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's fine. It's an arterial vein. You idiot. You're leaving a puddle." Without asking permission, Dottie shrugged off her ruined silk blouse. Beneath it, she wore a simple black lace camisole. She gripped the torn silk and ripped it down the seam with a sharp, violent tear. The sound was loud in the confined space. "Give me your arm," she ordered. Abraham hesitated. He looked at her bare shoulders, covered in goosebumps, shivering violently in the freezing air. "You're going to freeze." "I'll freeze anyway if you bleed to death and leave me alone with them," she snapped, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. She wrapped the silk tightly around his forearm. The smooth, luxurious fabric felt utterly absurd against his dirty, grease-stained skin. She pulled the knot tight. Abraham hissed through his teeth. "Sorry," she whispered. Her voice lacked the boardroom command. It was small, human. The match burned down to her fingertips. She dropped it, plunging them back into absolute darkness. But the space between them had shifted. The vast, insurmountable canyon between the billionaire and the courier had narrowed, reduced to a few feet of muddy concrete and a makeshift silk bandage. Abraham rested his uninjured hand over hers in the dark, a brief, grounding touch. Her skin was freezing, but her pulse was steady. "We wait here until first light," Abraham murmured, leaning back against the wall, his exhaustion finally dragging him under. "If I fall asleep, kick me." "I will," Dottie promised in the dark. Condensation dripped from the curved concrete ceiling, each heavy bead hitting the muddy floor with a hollow, rhythmic tick. Abraham opened his eyes. Blinking felt like dragging sandpaper across his corneas. Every muscle fiber in his back had locked solid overnight. When he drew his first breath, the cracked ribs on his right side screamed, sending a white-hot spike of agony radiating through his chest. Grey, lifeless light bled into the mouth of the culvert. Dawn had broken, but the thick coastal fog swallowed the sun entirely, leaving the woods suspended in a damp, freezing purgatory. Beside him, Dottie was awake. She sat with her knees pulled tightly to her chest, engulfed in Abraham's oversized canvas jacket. The heavy brown fabric swallowed her frame, making her look infinitely smaller than the woman who commanded skyscrapers. Her bare legs were splattered with dried mud and scratches, ending in the ruined, blood-soaked bundles of his torn bandana. She stared at the entrance, her jaw clenched so tightly Abraham could hear her teeth grinding. "Don't move," Abraham whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. His throat felt lined with shattered glass. Footsteps crunched overhead, heavy, measured, tactical treads biting into the gravel of the access road, just a few feet above their concrete sanctuary. The sound vibrated through the roof of the pipe, raining small flakes of rust and dirt into Abraham's hair. He instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there, his fingers curling uselessly into the muddy earth. "Check the lower drainage," a voice commanded from above. It was smooth, unhurried, the voice of a man who didn't view this as a crisis, but as a minor logistical hurdle. This was Vincent Rossi. Abraham had dealt with men like Vincent in the Coringal Valley, sociopaths who wore discipline like a tailored suit, insulating themselves from the butchery of their profession. "She wouldn't make it far barefoot," Vincent continued, his boots shifting directly over Abraham's head. "But the courier knows evasion. He's carrying injuries. Look for dragged brush and blood trails." Dottie stopped breathing. Her eyes locked onto Abraham's, wide and feral. The corporate veneer was completely gone now, replaced by the primal, desperate panic of a trapped animal. She reached out, her freezing fingers digging into Abraham's uninjured wrist. Abraham placed a hand over hers. His pulse thumped slowly against her frantic grip. He pressed a finger to his lips. Overhead, a radio crackled. Static hissed, followed by a muffled reply. Vincent's boots ground into the gravel once more, moving slowly down the embankment toward the mouth of their pipe. They were out of time. Abraham carefully shifted his weight, gritting his teeth as his knee popped loudly. The sound echoed in the confined space, deafeningly loud to his own ears. He froze. Vincent's footsteps stopped. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The smell of wet decay inside the pipe seemed to intensify, mixing with the sharp, metallic tang of Abraham's infected arm. The silk bandage Dottie had tied was stiff, glued to his skin by coagulated fluid and dirt. Abraham locked eyes with Dottie and pointed toward the rear of the culvert, a narrow, debris-choked exit leading deeper into the ravine. He held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. He grabbed a heavy, fist-sized rock from the mud with a sudden, explosive rotation of his torso that tore at his ruined ribs. Abraham hurled the stone out the front of the culvert. It sailed through the fog, crashing violently into a dense patch of dry holly bushes 20 yards down the hill. Leaves shattered, branches snapped. "Movement!" a voice shouted from the ridge. Automatic gunfire erupted instantly, a deafening mechanical roar that shredded the morning quiet. Branches disintegrated as suppressed rounds chewed through the holly bushes. "Move!" Abraham hissed, shoving Dottie toward the back of the pipe. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled on her hands and knees, tearing her fingernails on the rough concrete, dragging her bandaged feet through the slime and dead leaves. Abraham followed, his bad leg dragging behind him like a dead weight. They spilled out the rear of the pipe into a steep, muddy trench. Abraham grabbed her jacket collar, hauling her to her feet. The incline was brutal, a 45-degree wall of slick clay and exposed roots. "Climb," he ordered, his lungs burning as he shoved her upward. Dottie dug her fingers into the mud, pulling herself up the embankment. Her breath hitched in ragged sobs, not from sorrow, but from sheer physical exhaustion. Every time she slipped, Abraham's heavy, calloused hand hit her lower back, driving her upward, a relentless engine of survival, refusing to let her quit. Abraham's own body was failing, his vision blurred at the edges, tunneling into a narrow cone of grey trees and wet earth. The phantom smell of cordite returned, thick and choking. He wasn't in the Palisades anymore. He was back in the dust, carrying a wounded radio man up a scree slope while tracers snapped overhead. He bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted warm copper. The pain grounded him. It dragged him back to the present, to the freezing fog and the billionaire CEO clawing her way through the dirt ahead of him. They crested the ridge, collapsing into a thick bed of decaying pine needles. Abraham rolled onto his back, staring up at the grey canopy, gasping for air that felt too thin to sustain him. "Get up," Dottie wheezed, her hand slapping his chest. It was a weak hit, but it carried the desperate authority of someone terrified of being left alone. "You said we keep moving." Abraham turned his head. She looked completely wrecked. Mud smeared across her face like war paint, her black lace camisole visible beneath the oversized jacket, her hair matted with leaves and sweat. He let out a dry, rattling laugh. It hurt immensely. "What?" she snapped, shivering violently. "You look like hell, Ms. Carlyle." "You look worse, Abraham." It was the first time she had used his name. It hung in the damp air between them, stripping away the last remnants of their former identities. There were no CEOs or couriers out here, just two mammals trying to outrun predators. He forced himself upright, his joints popping in protest. "Let's go. We're almost to the logging road." Pine trees eventually gave way to a rusted wire fence, half buried in creeping ivy. Beyond it lay a scarred strip of asphalt, an old utility road winding down toward the valley. Civilization, or at least the ragged edge of it. Dottie let out a choked gasp of relief, stumbling toward the wire. "We made it." Abraham didn't feel relief. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, a prickling sensation hardwired into his nervous system by years of ambushes. The woods were too quiet. The birds hadn't returned. "Stop," Abraham grunted, grabbing her shoulder. A figure stepped out from behind a rusted transformer box on the opposite side of the road. Vincent Rossi wore a dark, weatherproof jacket, his hands casually resting on the suppressed submachine gun slung across his chest. He didn't look tired. He didn't look muddy. He looked like a man who had simply taken a shortcut to the finish line. "Ms. Carlyle," Vincent called out, his voice carrying easily through the fog. "I have to admit, you made us work for this. Your board of directors will be highly disappointed in the delay." Dottie froze, her hand hovering over the rusted wire. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, ash gray. "My board?" she whispered, the words barely escaping her throat. "Corporate transitions are messy," Vincent said, taking a slow step forward. "Some shareholders prefer a tragic kidnapping over a messy severance package. The algorithm passes to the vice chair upon your declared death. It's just business." Dottie staggered back, bumping into Abraham's chest. The realization hit her harder than the physical beating of the night. Her own people, the empire she built, the sterile, untouchable wealth. It was all a cage, and the people holding the keys had just locked her inside. "Step away from the courier, Dottie," Vincent said, raising the barrel of the weapon. "He's earned a clean exit. I'll shoot him in the head. You, unfortunately, have to get into the van down the road." Abraham looked at Vincent. He looked at the gun. Then he looked down at his own trembling hands. He was out of tricks, He was out of strength. He had a 7-year-old girl waiting for him, eating stale cereal while watching cartoons, entirely unaware that her father was bleeding to death in the woods. Abraham felt a dark, ancient rage ignite in his chest, burning away the pain, burning away the exhaustion. It was the ugly, unrefined violence he had spent 10 years trying to wash off. "Dottie," Abraham said softly, never breaking eye contact with Vincent. "When I move, you run down the asphalt. Don't look back." "Abraham, no," she choked out, grabbing his jacket. "He has a gun." "I know." Abraham didn't sprint. He didn't have the knees for it. He simply lowered his shoulder and charged like a wounded bull, barreling through the rusted wire fence. The barbs tore his jeans, slicing deeply into his thigh. But he didn't feel it. Vincent sighed, raising the sights. "Suit yourself." Thwip, thwip. The suppressed rounds spit dirt beside Abraham's boot. The third round caught Abraham in the left shoulder. It wasn't a clean through and through. It was a heavy, blunt impact that spun him around, dropping him to his bad knee on the asphalt. "Abraham!" Dottie screamed. Vincent walked forward, casually adjusting his aim to finish the job. He was 10 feet away. 5 feet. Abraham's hand shot out, grabbing a handful of loose gravel and broken glass from the shoulder of the road. As Vincent stepped into execution range, Abraham threw the debris directly into the mercenary's eyes. Vincent flinched, turning his head instinctively. It was all the opening Abraham needed. He launched himself upward off his good leg, driving his skull directly into the center of Vincent's face. Cartilage shattered. Vincent staggered backward, the gun firing wildly into the sky as Abraham tackled him to the ground. They rolled across the abrasive asphalt. It wasn't a fight of skill. It was a desperate, ugly struggle for survival. Vincent was younger, his muscles fueled by adrenaline and training. He pinned Abraham's wounded arm with his knee, driving a brutal, short punch into Abraham's broken ribs. Abraham howled, his vision flashing white. He tasted bile. Vincent reached down, wrapping his gloved hands around Abraham's throat, squeezing with mechanical efficiency. "You should have stayed out of it, delivery boy." Abraham couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across his vision. He clawed at Vincent's wrists, his grip weak, fingers sliding off the thick, tactical fabric. He thought of Lily. He thought of her laugh, the way she smelled like strawberry shampoo and crayons. He wasn't going to let this corporate hitman take that away. Abraham stopped fighting the choke. Instead, his right hand blindly searched the asphalt beside his hip. His fingers brushed against something heavy, cold, and solid. The rusted iron casing of a broken pipe fitting, discarded by a utility crew years ago. His hand clamped around it. With the last ounce of strength in his failing body, Abraham swung the iron upward in a brutal, sweeping arc. The heavy metal connected with the side of Vincent's temple with a sickening, hollow crack. Vincent's eyes rolled back. His grip loosened instantly. Abraham hit him again and again. The rage took over, blinding and deafening him. He brought the iron down until the man beneath him stopped twitching, until the pristine tactical jacket was soaked in something dark and wet. "Abraham!" Fingers grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back. Abraham spun wildly, raising the bloody iron, entirely consumed by the fight. Dottie stood there. She wasn't shrinking away from the gore. She wasn't screaming. She looked at him with an expression of profound, devastating clarity. She gently placed both of her hands over his, forcing the iron down. "He's done," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's done, Abraham." Abraham dropped the metal. It clattered against the asphalt. He slumped backward, lying flat on the cold road, staring up at the grey sky. Rain finally began to fall, tiny freezing droplets that washed the grime from his face. Every breath was a battle. His shoulder burned, his ribs ground together, and his throat was bruised and raw. In the distance, faint but growing louder, the wail of sirens cut through the fog. Dottie had flagged a passing utility truck while he fought. Dottie sat beside him on the wet pavement. She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like a survivor. She pulled his ruined canvas jacket tighter around her shoulders, reaching out to press her freezing hand against the gunshot wound on his shoulder, applying pressure. $5 million, she murmured, staring down at the bloody mess of his chest. "I promised you. I'm keeping it." Abraham turned his head slowly, looking at her. The corporate queen brought down to the dirt, saved by a man who couldn't afford a new set of tires. "Just—" Abraham coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Just pay for the babysitter. She charges time and a half after midnight." Dottie let out a startled, wet laugh, tears finally carving tracks through the mud on her face. "Deal." Abraham closed his eyes, listening to the sirens get closer. The cordite was gone. The ozone was gone. All he could smell was the rain, washing away the night, carrying him back to the only world that mattered. Did this raw, gritty escape keep you on the edge of your seat? Abraham's fight is far from over, and Dottie is just beginning to realize the true cost of survival. If you loved this deep dive into human endurance and imperfect heroism, hit that like button and share it with fellow thriller fans. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss part 4, where the real hunt begins. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.